Indirect questions. We use indirect questions to talk about what someone has asked. Before we talk about indirect questions, though, what are direct questions? Direct questions are the questions exactly how they come out of someone's mouth. For example, what is your name? What did you eat yesterday? Are you a student? Did it rain last night? We can also include who asked the questions, like here. He asked her, what is your name? She asked them, what did you eat yesterday? They asked him, are you a student? We asked, did it rain last night? These are direct questions with a little more context, but they're still the direct questions as they came out of the person's mouth. Notice that when we do this, we include quotation marks. That's these two little guys that I marked in red circles. We use quotation marks around the direct question. So anything that is between the quotation marks is what came out of someone's mouth. Also, direct questions have question marks at the end. What is your name? Question mark. As you can see here with the question marks that I have circled in green. Some questions begin with WH words. These words are who, what, where, when, why, how many, how much, how long, how old, etc. Yeah, they don't all start with WH, but most of them do. So we call them WH words or WH question words. For example, here are some WH questions. Who's your boss? What's your name? Where do you live? When did you come to the US? Why did you go to the park? How did you meet your friend? How old are your children? These are direct questions with WH words. Other questions are yes/no questions because the possible answers are, well, yes or no. For example, is today Wednesday? Do you know him? Have we met before? Is it raining? Do you like to read? All of these are yes/no questions, and they do not have a WH word. All questions in English have the same word order. First, we have the verb, then the subject. Often there are additional verbs after the subject too, and maybe some other words, but the most important is verb, then subject. So all of that was about direct questions. But what about indirect questions? When we make indirect questions, we change some things. We change the word order, and sometimes we change the verb tense. We also don't use quotation marks or question marks in indirect questions. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look. In indirect questions, we use sentence word order, not question word order. Sentence word order, first we have subject, then the verb. Remember, this is how we make positive sentences, negative sentences, and questions in English. I've marked here all the verbs in bold. So a positive sentence is, they like pizza. Negative, they don't like pizza. Question, do they like pizza? So this example is in the simple present. Here are some examples in past. He cooked dinner. Did he cook dinner? Notice that when we have the question, we have the word did, and the verb cook is in the simple form. We don't have ed. But when we have a positive sentence, we do need the ed here. And the verb to be, you are my neighbor. You are not my neighbor. Are you my neighbor? When we have indirect WH questions, we use the WH word in the question. So if the direct question is, he asked her, what is your name? Oh, I forgot quotation marks. He asked her, what is your name? To make this indirect, I will say, he asked her what her name is. He asked her what her name is. He asked her what her name is. So your name, this is the subject of the question. And in a question, it comes after the verb. But in an indirect question, it goes before the verb. The verb is goes after the subject. And in the original question, we have the pronoun your name. But when we make this indirect, we're changing it to her, because he asked her what her name is. Not my name, not your name, her name. He asked her what her name is. So when you're making indirect questions, pay attention to the subject. She asked them, what did you eat yesterday? Here we have a question in the past. What did you eat? If I want to make this a sentence, I will say, you ate. We're going to use this. So to make this in the past, in an indirect question, we will say, she asked them what they ate yesterday. Notice that did eat, we don't have that, we have ate. So the subject you moves forward, and instead of you, we have they, because she asked them what they ate. Did eat, here we have ate. Remember, this is sentence word order, not question word order. When we have indirect yes/no questions, we use the word if in questions. We can also use the word whether or the phrase whether or not instead of if. These are just other ways to say if. They are less common and a little bit more formal. You will hear them, but they are less common. So in indirect yes/no questions, we use the word if. Let's look at some examples. They asked him, are you a student? To make this indirect, I will say they asked him if he is a student. Or they asked him whether he is a student. They asked him whether or not he is a student. So in the question, the direct question, are you a student? When we make this indirect, we're not talking about you or you and me. We're talking about some other guy, he. So we will take you and make it he, put it at the beginning. The verb to be moves later. Are becomes is. They asked him if he is a student. We asked, did it rain last night? To make this indirect, we asked if it rained last night, or whether or not. So the subject it stays the same. Did rain becomes rained. We asked if it rained last night. We asked if it rained last night. Here are some more examples of indirect WH and yes/no questions. He asked me, how old are you? Indirect question. He asked me how old I am. How old I am. Direct question. She asked you, how old are your children? Indirect question. She asked you how old your children are. The subject of this question is your children. She asked you how old your children are. They asked us, do you live in DC? To make this indirect, we're going to use the word if because we don't have a WH word. They asked us if we live in DC. Or they asked us whether we live in DC. They asked us whether or not we lived in DC. But more commonly, they asked us if we live in DC. They asked us, where do you live? Where do you live? So this is a similar question, but here we have a WH word. So we'll say, they asked us where we live. They asked us where we live. Is today Wednesday? I asked. To make this indirect, I'll say, I asked if today is Wednesday. I asked if today is Wednesday. In casual, spoken, informal English, we don't always change the verb tense of the indirect question. But in formal or written English, it's a little more serious. We usually take one step back in the past. What do I mean by that? If the question is in the simple present, we will take one step back and make the indirect question in the simple past. Let me show you what I mean. The direct question, they asked us, where do you live? This original question is in the simple present. If I make this indirect, I can say they asked us where we lived. This formal indirect question is in the past. So if direct is in the present, indirect is one step back in time in the simple past. He asked me, how old are you? Again, I have a question in the simple present. To say this a little bit more formally as an indirect question, I'll say, he asked me how old I was. Taking one step back. He asked the children, are you doing your homework? This question is in the present continuous. We have the verb to be, are, plus ing, doing. Are you doing your homework? To take a step back from the present continuous, we have the past continuous. So we'll say he asked the children if they were doing their homework. He asked the children if they were doing their homework. I asked her, will you go shopping tomorrow? This original question is in the future with will. When we're taking a step back using the word will, this is kind of confusing, but we use the word would instead of will. So to make this indirect, we can say, I asked her if she would go shopping the next day. I asked her if she would go shopping the next day. She asked him, did you cook dinner? This original question is in the simple past. To take one step back from the simple past, we go to the past perfect, which is had plus participle. So if we want to formally restate this direct question, we can say, she asked him if he had cooked dinner. Here we have a question in the present perfect. The present perfect, when we take a step back, goes to the past perfect. So the original question, he asked her, have we met before? The indirect question is, he asked her if they had met before. So here I have a number of direct questions. She asked me, do you have any pets? If I want to make this an informal indirect question, I will keep the verb tense the same. Here it's the simple present. Here it's the simple present. So to make this informal indirect, I will say, she asked if I have any pets. If I want to make this a formal question, I will take a step back into the simple past. She asked if I had any pets. So I have here 4 more direct questions. If you want, you can pause the video and come up with the answers, write the answers for these other indirect questions. So here are the informal indirect questions. And here are the formal indirect questions. Here we have the sentence in the present, and we go the question in the present, and we step back to the past. In the next one, will you come to class tomorrow? Taking a step back, we have would. Have you been to New York? Becomes, I asked them if they had been to New York. And this question is in the simple past, and we also go to the past perfect. He asked us where we had bought groceries. All right. Well, I messed that one up. Okay. Here are some more direct and indirect questions. Well, I wanted you to write the questions, but hey, here we go. Okay. We often use indirect questions to make direct questions a little more polite, or if we want to get more information. So by polite, I mean just a little bit softer, a little bit nicer. Instead of saying, what time is it? I could say, do you know what time it is? This just sounds to American ears a little bit nicer, a little bit more polite, and a little bit more friendly. So when we do this, when we use indirect questions to make things polite or more polite, we do not change the time. The common phrases that we use in these situations are, can you tell me, ba, 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 or do you know, ba, ba, ba. So for example, I could say, what time is it? Or if I want to ask this politely, I'll say, can you tell me what time it is? Can you tell me what time it is? If I say, where's the train station? I could also say, do you know where the train station is? Notice in these questions, we do not use a period. If we are using indirect questions to be polite, they stay questions, even though we are rephrasing them. So here are some more. Where's the bus? Do you know where the bus is? Can you tell me where the bus is? Can you tell me what time it is? Can you tell me how I can get to the metro station? We use these a lot, a lot. We can also use indirect questions with other phrases like the following. I want to know, bup, bup, bup. I wonder, bup, bup, bup. I am curious. I know or I don't know. For example, the direct question, when is the bus coming? If I want to make this an indirect question or an indirect statement, I can say, I wonder when the bus is coming. I'm not really asking anyone, I'm just thinking, I wonder when it's coming. Similarly, I could say, wow, I don't know how long they have been married. I don't know how long they've been married. Maybe 5 years, I don't know. Who were you talking to? I could say, I know who you were talking to. You were talking to your friend, I don't know. I know who you were talking to. I want to know how I can get a driver's license. I want to know how I can get a driver's license. So indirect questions can be kind of confusing because we're moving verbs around and we're changing the subjects and everything, but we use them a lot. I hope this video has been helpful and not only confusing. So keep your ears open when you are listening to Americans or watching TV or listening to music or whatever. Keep your ears open and you will hear these questions. Good luck.